from these very brief opening words that I'm not from these parts, not even from London, though I love London and had always wanted to live in London, but I'm actually from Edinburgh. Edinburgh is a wonderful city. Anyone here been to Edinburgh? Fantastic. Look at this. Scots do find their way everywhere. And if you have been to Edinburgh, then I'm sure you'll agree with me that after Rustington, Edinburgh is heaven on earth, the new Jerusalem itself. I've lived in London for over a decade. I'm married to Cara. She is a journalist by training. She's actually a newsreader on Times Radio. So if you are listening to Times Radio in the morning from 4:30 until midday, you will hear her dulcet tones. So she gets up at 3:15 every morning. We have an 18-month-old daughter called Azura, which means I do all the mornings, and then she goes off to nursery, and Cara picks her up and does all the afternoons. So that's how we do it. Looking after an 18-month-old and giving her porridge is an education all by itself. I'm surviving, thriving. It's just the twitch in my right eye. If I could get rid of that, that would be good. I am part of a church called Trinity Road Chapel in southwest London, and it is my privilege to be here with you this evening. Let me say a bit about care, because we were just talking on the way up, and I'm conscious that some of you here might have heard of care. Some of you may not know who we are. So if you'll permit me, I'll take just a few moments to talk about the charity that I work for. So CARE stands for Christian Action, Research and Education, and our story goes back to the nationwide Festival of Light in 1971. If we could have the next slide, please, that would be great. It was the 25th of September, 1971, Trafalgar Square. Christians from all over the country were bussed in for a spectacular demonstration. And there was a real concern at the time that lots of laws were changing in the nation, but the church was largely silent. Nobody was talking about praying for our local councillors or praying for our MPs and just praying for the nation itself. And so out of concern for the state of the nation, 10,000 plus Christians came together. And apparently they sang songs on the underground and on the buses as they gathered there in Trafalgar Square for an amazing concert. And afterwards they walked through London and they went to Hyde Park, where the evergreen Cliff Richards led them in song alongside a little-known hymn writer called Graham Kendrick. And this grassroots movement was all about how can we change society for the better? How can we bring a Christian influence into the corridors of power? And so the nationwide Festival of Light became this campaigning organization, and then, under the leadership of a Pentecostal minister called Lyndon Bowring, along with an amazing man called Charlie Colchester and Lyndon's wife Celia Bowring, they launched CARE in 1983. And it's been going ever since. We have an office 5 minutes from Westminster. It's 5 minutes if you walk, it's 3 minutes if you run, it's 2.5 minutes if you sprint. And this office has allowed us to do a number of things. Firstly, to get into Parliament at the drop of a hat. But secondly, some of the laws of our land have been written in our head office. So one of the great skills that colleagues of mine have at CARE is they're able to draft legislation, which is a fiendishly complicated and difficult thing to do. But, for example, in Northern Ireland, there is a Human Trafficking and Sexual Exploitation Act that was passed in 2015, and every word of that was written by a colleague of mine from our head office in London. So there's 3 things we do. We engage churches, like I'm doing tonight, we equip politicians, and we empower future leaders as well. So CARE runs something called the Leadership Programme. We take Christian graduates from a variety of universities, and we give them a placement in Parliament, cross-party, with different MPs and peers, and then on a Friday we bring them together in our head office and we equip them, we train them. Some of you might know the former Deputy First Minister of Scotland. I assure you this is one of the last Scotland references you'll hear tonight. But former Deputy First Minister of Scotland, Kate Forbes. Kate was a graduate from our leadership programme. And at the last election, one Labour MP and one Conservative MP, both of them are graduates from CARE's programme. That's its heartbeat, to raise up leaders for the public square. That's all I'll say. At the back, so my right, your left, there's a table with a beautiful teal tablecloth with the CARE logo on, and it's packed with literature. Now, the box I had to carry over about 100 metres from the car was extremely heavy. So if you were to ask me the question, how can I bless you tonight? It's a wonderful question. You can bless me by protecting the axle on my car and protecting my back by taking all of the free literature that I've brought for you tonight. Let me highlight a couple of things very quickly. We've just published a biblical deep dive on poverty. What does the Bible say about poverty? Such a huge issue in our society. So many children, especially, living below the poverty line. God's heart is for the most vulnerable in our communities. So this is a really helpful resource. Please take a copy of that. We also do these things called topic guides. This is Dear MP, engaging with your MP effectively. And what's so great about this is one of my colleagues is a former MP, and she's written just about half of it. So please do take a copy. Caroline Ansell from Eastbourne, so not a million miles from here. She works for CARE now. If you're new to CARE, want to find out more, pick up a copy of our vision booklet. And if you are somebody who prays, and I assume being in a Christian church, most of us here will pray from time to time, Celia Bowring writes perhaps the most extraordinary prayer diary that I've ever come across. And I know I'm paid to say that, but it is true. The CARE prayer diary covers every single day of the entire year. We publish it 4 times a year, and the variety of prayers that she writes is second to none. So if you want to broaden and enrich your prayer life, please take a copy of the CARE prayer diary. Final thing, and then we'll get on with the main event. CARE is entirely supported by so many amazing people from all across the United Kingdom. If you would love to join up with us tonight, and please do fill in this form here. And in particular, if you give us your email and you want to receive our weekly email, the first item in that email is always an attempt to say, here's the big story of the week. What should we think about it as Christians? What's a Christian way to approach the issue of? And different colleagues write them. They come from different political persuasions, so you'll get variety. You might not always agree, but I hope you'll always be stimulated. And the more people we have signed up, the more people we have praying for our politics, but also when there are big votes in Parliament, we can then let you know, now's the time to write to your MP, and here's how. So all you need to do is fill your information in, then fold it over like that, just leave it in the side on the table, and I'll wing them back to London. They're the only things I'm willing to take back with me tonight, is filled in forms. Well, thank you. You've been very patient in indulging me with that sales pitch. So I'm going to put this to one side. There we go. And we will get on with talking about truth, scams, fake news. Now, being married to a journalist, I have a vested interest in promoting the importance of good media. In fact, I was listening to Cara being interviewed just recently, and she was talking about how, as Christians, it's very easy for us to become cynical about our news and about the media in general. But they play a vital role in our democracy. At their best, pointing out fake news and holding those in power to account. But if we turn to Scripture for a moment, let me just read a few verses from when Jesus was on trial. So this is from John chapter 18. And this is a conversation that happened between Pontius Pilate, the governor, the Roman governor of Judea, and our Lord Jesus. Let me pick it up from verse 35 of John chapter 18. Pilate asks him, "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied, "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. With this he went out to the Jews gathered and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. It's funny really, isn't it? You think about the trial of Jesus and you might not associate fake news with that trial. But why is it he's arrested in the first place? It's because of fake accusations against him. Charges of blasphemy that were untrue. And Pilate's question, there we read it in verse 38, what is truth? He's not asking that because he's interested in truth as a kind of weighty philosophical concept. He's actually asking it dismissively. In effect, what he's saying to Jesus is, it doesn't matter whether the charges are true or not. It doesn't matter if you are a king or not. It doesn't matter if what they say is right or not. All that matters is my power over you, my control, my authority. He asks the question, what is truth, dismissively. But actually he was oh so wrong, wasn't he? What is truth is one of the most profound and important questions that we can ever ask, and maybe especially at a time where our wider society is so confused about what is true. When we've seen the rise of fake news, when we've seen political leaders with the most awesome power and responsibilities arguably in the world brazenly lie and use their public platform to spread misinformation. The fact that the BBC now have a fact checker as an established part of their media output, that was never the case 10 years ago. All of that is telling us that we need to know what is true from what is fake. Here's what one Christian professor and apologist, Nancy Pearcey, said, speaking about truth. These are not merely abstract intellectual matters fit for philosophers and historians to debate in the rarefied atmosphere of academia. Ideas and cultural developments and the truth affects real people, shaping the way they think and live out their lives. I think she's exactly right. Or what about the Christian apologist Os Guinness? He connects truth with freedom. Now, I'm sure each one of us here would say we want to be free. Well, listen to Os Guinness. Truth matters supremely because in the end, without truth, there is no freedom. Truth, in fact, is not only essential to freedom, it is freedom. And the only way to live a free life lies in becoming a person of truth and learning to live in truth. Living in truth is the secret of living free. I think about it for a moment. What are the basic and big questions of life? They are, who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? And truth answers each and every one of those questions. You want to know who you are, why you're here, and where you're going? There's all manner of answers out there, and tonight what I hope to show you is that the Christian faith answers those questions in the most satisfactory way. Here's my first point when it comes to truth, and it's this. We all hate being lied to. If you've ever experienced that sinking, gnawing, horrible feeling, whether it's a family member or a work colleague, whether it's someone in your community, someone in your church community, if you have experienced being lied to, it's sickening, isn't it? Something within us reacts viscerally to that. How could someone do that to me? Well, lying has become so much more complicated in this online world that we live in. In a digital age, lying now takes the form not just of barefaced lies, one human to another human, but hidden behind a cloak of anonymity, hidden behind the deception of the dark arts of the online world. Let me give you some examples of what's been happening in recent times. Let me tell you about a journalist called Victoria Turk. She was a high flyer, writing for The Guardian just about every single week, an expert in technology. She knew her stuff. And out of the blue, a headhunter emailed her with a role at a leading US technology and marketing editorial team. Fantastic. As it turns out, it ticked every single one of the boxes that she had on her list of jobs she would most enjoy in all the world. But Victoria was no fool. She knew she had to be careful in this digital age, so she did her research. She looked at the company, she looked at the headhunter, she went on to LinkedIn, she checked everything out, everything told her, this is legit, this is real, this is true. She entered into an email exchange that led to a job description that was so good, it was almost as if Victoria had written it herself. Suddenly, she's starting to wonder, wait a moment. And in the end, it turns out that the entire thing from start to finish was a massive fraud. And the only reason she spotted it is because she works in an industry and has a job that has taught her to be suspicious. But if they're that sophisticated with someone like Victoria, who came within a moment of accepting this fake job and giving a lot of money to do so, then how vulnerable are we who don't work in such a specialised field? Report Fraud, the UK's National Cybercrime Reporting Service, said it received more than twice as many reports of recruitment scams in 2024 compared with 2022. It's not just recruitment scams, though. There's a booming romance scam market going on. One part of the United Kingdom, Cumbria, in 2024, victims lost £630,000 to online romance scams. One British woman lost up to £1 million over several years to romance scammers. People who claimed to be people they were not, and doing it in such a sophisticated way. It wasn't just that. What about the UK courier scam? There was a woman in Derbyshire who was tricked into believing she was speaking to her bank and the police. She handed over her bank cards and security details because every message told her this was legit. She stayed on the phone for hours and hours. She followed instructions to change all of her passwords, and all the while, scammers drained her accounts completely. She lost everything. Now, you might not know someone who's lost on that scale, but I bet you anything you like, everyone here tonight has either been a victim on some level of a scam, or has come very close to being a victim of an online scam, or knows somebody who's been a victim of an online scam. Let me tell you a story that doesn't really reflect very well on myself. When I was about 19 or something, I got a message from my bank that told me there'd been some suspicious activity. I panicked and at 2 a.m. phoned my bank to try to resolve this issue. I'm not quite sure what I hoped would happen at such a time. However, I did speak to somebody eventually, and I got passed from the fraud team back to the customer service team, to the fraud team and the customer service team, and they said, right, pop onto your online banking and have a look, anything suspicious. And I said, yes. I said, yes, I can see it right there. Standing order, £25. I did not set up a standing order for £25. And they said, that's fine, sir, no worries at all, and hopefully we can resolve this quickly and we can all go to bed. We'll pass you back to the fraud team. They'll look into this for you. So line went dead for a while, it went back to the fraud team, and then the customer service rep came back on the line, and I kid you not, they were struggling not to laugh. They said, sir, we've just spoken to the fraud team, they've looked into it for you. Did you by any chance in the last couple of days spend £25 in a pub called the Standing Order? You can see why my family are very worried that I'll be the victim of the next scam. You know, the truth of the matter is that when it comes to these scams, what's happening now is companies and individuals are manipulating victims more than they are hacking systems. So you might have seen the big hacking scandal from Marks and Spencer's. That's cost that company an awful lot of money to sort out. But that's actually the exception. What is happening every single day is not necessarily a system hack, but instead using all manner of means to manipulate individuals. And the rise of artificial intelligence has only complicated this even further. I don't know if you saw recently, I mean, not that I'm the best person to talk about, popular culture, but I don't know if you saw recently there were these pictures online of the pop star Zendaya and her partner Tom Holland, who played Spider-Man, by the way. And these pictures seemingly were of their wedding day. And of course, the internet reacted, I can't believe they've got married. They're my favorite couple. Isn't this brilliant? I mean, it was brilliant. It's just fake. But it looked so real. That is the world that we are living in. So again, we come back to this point. Truth matters enormously when we are faced with such a deluge of challenges. Or think about politics for a moment, the world that I live and breathe and work in. Think about how angry we felt when we realized that we had been lied to by the rule makers during COVID, and it turned out they were breaking the very rules that they had written. Think about how we felt when we saw the late Queen sat by herself at her late husband's funeral in splendid isolation because that's what the rules said, and all the while they were partying in number 10. Or think about the fact that in 2020 there was a democratic election in the United States, and one political leader, whose name we all know but I will not say, has continued to insist the election was stolen with such force and vehemence that even people I know who ordinarily would never go along with it have started to wonder, maybe it's true. Here's the thing, friends, we all hate being lied to. And politics is filled with broken promises, isn't it? Cynicism with politics has apparently never been higher. And one of the reasons for that is because politicians make promises that they can't necessarily keep. And we all are impacted by this. There's the first thing. We all hate being lied to. Here's the second thing, and this is a harder point, but it is important. We can all lie, can't we? I know myself, I'm 35 years old, and there's still a part of me that goes to a lie when I'm faced with an embarrassing situation. If I face being exposed as having failed or done something wrong, there is still a part of me that wants to grab for a barefaced lie to get myself out of it. But it's not just the barefaced lies, is it? We've created a culture where we talk about white lies, small lies that don't really matter. But it's not just that either. It's also the fact that we can, at times, exaggerate stories. We can make facts and embellish them ourselves in order to make the stories sound more impressive than they really are, to win people over, to impress people. So here's the paradox of being human. On the one hand, the fake news and the scams and all of that, we viscerally react to that, and if we are the victim, we react all the more, and rightly so. But when it comes to truth and lies, we are also part of the problem, because we too can manipulate truth for our own gain. Os Guinness again. As human beings, we are by nature truth seekers. As fallen human beings, we are also by nature truth twisters. That is fascinating. On the one hand, because we're made in God's image, we want the truth. God is true, we're made in his image, therefore we have a natural desire to seek the truth. But on the other hand, we can lie too. And therefore it is even more important in this generation that Christians and the Christian church is known for being on the side of truth, for being careful with our words, for standing against deception in all its forms, for speaking the truth, even if it means not exaggerating for effect. So what is truth? Coming back to Pilate's great question, what is truth? Now, I had a lot of fun going through all the ways that I could answer this tonight, and I thought it was a wonderful crowd of people. I've spent a limited amount of time with you, but I want you to know I like you very, very much. And that's not me manipulating at all or exaggerating. And I thought I could do a big philosophical piece at this point, because I'm not a philosopher at all. But you can read philosophers, and nowadays you can use ChatGPT to tell you what the philosophers think. And of course, we should trust everything that ChatGPT tells us. So I did something really radical. I went to a book. What's that? I went to a book and it told me this. So the most common idea of truth in the philosophical world, and this is something that is, as Christians, many of us here, I think we can agree with, is the correspondence theory of truth. And this is the idea that truth must correspond with reality. In other words, if something is to be true, we must be able to test it, and it must match up with what we experience. So the obvious thing of thinking about the laws of physics and the laws of gravity, we can test them. We know that if we drop something from this height, it will fall to the ground. We know that. We can verify it. We can correspond it. Correspondence theory of truth. But historically, how would people know what the truth is? Go back 200, 300, 400 years. What would people do? Well, you see, back then in this country, they would more instinctively, I suggest, recognize that there is a transcendent God, and that in some way who he is and what he says must help us understand the world that we live in. But if you were to go back just a couple of hundred years, then the acceptance of God as being real and as being the being that defines what is true began to be picked at and unpicked. Look, the Enlightenment of the 18th century especially, in many ways, was a fantastic thing. And there is no conflict, really, between science on the one hand and Christianity and religion on the other. But one of the things the Enlightenment did, an unintended consequence, was it displaced the idea of a transcendent God and said human reasoning and human powers, we can work out together what the truth is. We can arrive at that ultimate conclusion without reference to the transcendent. And one of the consequences of that mindset of believing that we live in a purely material world, if you were to listen to Richard Dawkins, for example, he would tell you, and he did so in his 1995 book, that underneath everything, if you were to remove everything and get to the heart of the matter, there's nothing. Just dark, empty nothingness. And if you were to go along with that idea that this material world is all that there is, my argument is that that doesn't really get us very far. And it doesn't actually match up with reality. We don't live like this is all that there is. We live, we laugh, we love, we care deeply about one another. We have the capacity, the ability to express such an astonishing range of emotions. We are incredibly sophisticated as human beings in what we are able to do. But rejecting God and saying it's just a material world has got us to such a point where in some primary schools in this country, children as young as 5 were presented with a list of gender identities that they could choose from. One such list had 105 different options. Now that's really strange. And it is odd, and we should say so. Calmly, kindly, compassionately, but I think that's what happens when you remove a creator, a designer, an intelligent being as being behind everything. If this world is all that there is, then I think it leaves us with subjective ideas of truth. And that's the great shift. We've gone historically from truth being objective, known, it corresponds with reality, we can know what it is. You might disagree with it, but you can know what it is, to truth being inward, to being self-defined. And this is the great cry of our age. To find real fulfillment in life, you've got to be true to yourself. Now, there's a degree to which I actually would agree with that, but it has its limits. It ultimately can't, I don't think, answer those fundamental questions of identity and purpose and hope that all of us have. And what it's led to is what some theologians call the fact value divide. So the rejection of God, the belief that we live in a purely material world, what do you do with religion? Christianity, you consign it to just a value. It's just your personal view. So facts are things like science, for example, things that we can know to be true. Whereas opinions and ideas of religion, they're just values. So we have facts and we have values, and the two are split. The problem with that is just this. If you say that all religious talk is just opinion, you perform what philosopher Simon Blackburn called a judo flip. Not literally, that would be extraordinary. You're actually making your own absolute claim, aren't you? If you say Christianity is fake news, that is an absolute claim. If you say religion is just a value, that is in itself an absolute claim. The very thing that you're trying to reject, you're actually doing. But there are other things as well that we can't just neatly split into the fact-value divide. Think about generosity, for example. Remember when Jesus was at the temple and he saw the widow put in her tiny amount of money? And compared to the rich man who was giving so generously and wanted everyone to know he was being generous. It looked like she was giving far less because she was, and so surely he was more generous than her. And Jesus is saying, no, you've got it all wrong. She's giving out of her poverty. I mean, if Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi, two of the richest men in the world, if they were to give you £100, then you'd say, well, thank you. Could you give me a bit more? Whereas if I was to give you £100, I'm sure you'd very kindly give it straight back. I would argue that one is generous and the other is not. But you see immediately how generosity, for something to be generous, we have to be able to have a standard, an objective standard to measure generosity. We have to be able to bring value and fact together to really understand who's being generous and who's not. So this fact-value divide, it just doesn't work. It doesn't get us closer to knowing what the truth is. It's fascinating, isn't it? In 2016, the Oxford Dictionary phrase of the year was post-truth, which means relating to or donating circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. I love what George Orwell said about such a time. In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Well, I want to be a revolutionary, don't you? The time of universal deceit, let's tell the truth. Even G.K. Chesterton, he saw where everything was going. He said, we shall soon be in a world in which a man may be howled down for saying that 2 and 2 make 4, in which people will persecute the heresy of calling a triangle a three-sided figure and hang a man for maddening a mob with the news that the grass is green. Now, he wrote that many, many years ago, but it rings true, doesn't it? What is truth? Well, the ultimate answer in our contemporary society is that there's a lot of confusion. Well, here's the answer then. Christianity starts with a God who is in himself true. And therefore, everything he does and everything he says is true. In fact, the Bible tells us that it's impossible for God to lie. He can't do it. And many, many texts could be piled up at this point, but perhaps the most helpful thing is to focus in on Jesus. Jesus, who we met at the very beginning of this talk, and before he was put on trial in an upper room with his closest disciples, he spoke to them and he said this in John 14, verse 6. Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And what I find so fascinating there is he doesn't say, I have come to speak the truth, or I've come to proclaim it and preach it. He says, I am the truth. In other words, Jesus narrates God to us. If we want to understand what God is like, we can look to Jesus. Jesus, who made the most extraordinary truth claims. I am the bread of life. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, streams of living water will flow through them. Jesus, who claimed that he would die and then rise from the dead on the third day. And of course, how many witnesses did he appear to provide verification, correspondence theory? First, he appeared to Mary in that amazing moment in the garden of the tomb where Mary sees him and she says, Rabbi, and he just says her name and she worships. He appeared to more than 500 witnesses who've taken the time to write it down. His claims, friends, can be verified, can be checked. Look at the impact of Christianity in our world as well. Oh, look, I know the church has not by any means always got it right. But at its best, it has been a force for good in our world, including in our own country. Schools were set up. Girls' education was started. Orphanages, adoption, fostering, all of these ministries pioneered out of incredible churches, out of a belief that we can know the truth, and that truth will set us free, out of a desire to live like Jesus lived. And ultimately, Jesus also promises that the truth will set us free. So in John 8, for example, John 8 in verse 32, Jesus had this to say. John 8 and verse 32. Then the Jews who believed him, to the Jews Jesus who had believed in him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. In other words, truth is not found within ourselves ultimately. It's found by looking first to God. How do we do that? We look to Jesus. We look to the way he lived his life, and we see a man of utmost compassion, someone who reached out to those on the margins of his time, a revolutionary in his own way, someone who made the most fantastical claims, and you can check them and verify them, and they're true. The transformation of life that comes when we follow Jesus is extraordinary. And ultimately, my claim tonight is that Christianity can helpfully help us to understand the world as it really is. So back to correspondence theory. Does Christianity accurately match reality? Well, let's just follow as we come to a close. The four great stages of this world. First, creation. God speaks and creates. A designer designs. There can be debates, good debates about all the means and mechanisms that he may have used, but what we do see in the early chapters of the Bible is the blueprint for how humans can flourish, the call to steward the world's resources. If we truly followed that command, we wouldn't have the hunger and the disparity and the brokenness that are all around us. God made us male and female, equal in value, dignity and worth, that care, this is a truth we love. Every human being made in the image of God, beautiful, designed by him. Psalm 139, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We're not just super developed animals. We are so much more than that. We're human beings that God has crowned with glory and honor. And therefore, this is the world that God made. And that's why when we look around us and we see that everything is wrong and broken, we recognize something's not right. And this takes us to the second great stage in the history of our world. It's the fall into sin. The Bible is so clear on this. From Genesis to Revelation, at the root of all of our problems is the issue of sin. We should not be embarrassed about using that word. Sin means to break the law of God, to go against him, to choose our own way, rather than choose to follow Jesus. How do we explain the problem of gambling addiction in our society? How do we explain that 2.4 million adults in England alone are either at risk of becoming addicted to gambling or already addicted? How do we explain the fact that in this country there are more than 100,000 men and women in some form of modern slavery? How do we explain the fact that there is child poverty at nearly record levels? How do we explain the fact that so many people want to work but can't find work? How do we explain the cost of living crisis? How do we explain wars and rumors of wars? The Bible's answer is because things are not as they should be, not as God designed them to be. And we recognize that. But then, of course, wonderfully, God sent Christ into this world, making those amazing claims. And here's the thing I always like to stress. God is not just in the business of saving individuals. He's in the business of rescuing the cosmos. Praise God, because he is worthy of all of that. And then finally, one day, he's coming again. And the passages that speak about the world, the new world, where swords become plowshares, where God himself will wipe tears away, where endless joy will crown those who take their place in the new world, where sorrow and sin and sighing, I love that. Sorrow and sin, yeah, I can get that being gone, but I mean, how many times have you sighed today? I think I did about 30 on the drive down. It was all those roundabouts. Sighing will be done away with. Death itself will be swallowed up. We rage against death, don't we? We recognize death as an enemy. And the Christian story helps us to understand why. If all there is a material world, then death is natural. Death is normal. We shouldn't be afraid of it. But we are, aren't we? And that is because this world was made to endure forever. So these 4 stages, creation, fall, redemption, consummation, the great story of Christianity, help us to truly understand the world as it is. So my final word to you is this. In a time of fake news and horrible, horrendous scams, on the one hand, there's all manner of practical, mechanical things that you should do, like change your passwords on a regular basis, and don't have the same password for every single thing that you need a password for. But more than that, the story of Christianity helps us understand the world as it really is. And I'll tell you something, and I'm sure you'll agree, it is the best story that there is, because it's a story of such hope and of the most miraculous love that has ever entered this world. So my friends, that story, embodied in Jesus, who is the truth, that is the way that we will help people find true freedom in this world. Thank you very much.
There's a button here somewhere. James, thank you very much. That's really challenging, I think, and inspiring in equal measure. I think I need to go for a drink in the standing order. So we've got a bit of time just to reflect on that now. There'll be some refreshments available, as I mentioned, pieces of paper and pens at the back and at the front here. So if you would like to write down a question, whatever your question would be very welcome, please do that, and perhaps just pop it on the podium here, and we'll get through as many as we can. So take about 15, 20 minutes break, and then please come back and let's have a little bit of questions and answers following up on what James has said. Thank you.
I find as I read the scriptures is just astonishing. The points of agreement between authors who never met each other, never saw each other, the prophecies of the coming of the Messiah that are to a T accurate, despite being written hundreds, if not thousands of years before, all of which adds to my confidence that the Bible is the most remarkable and amazing book, and the Gospels are so powerful precisely because they are the eyewitness accounts. You think of Luke, for example, Dr. Luke, who begins his gospel by saying, "Most excellent Theophilus," whoever he was. By the way, I've really looked at this, and I've set out an orderly account to help you understand who Jesus is. So I think for me, it's apparent discrepancies that can be resolved, and when I broaden it out to look at the whole scripture, it is just, the consistency is amazing.
Thank you. This one's slightly different. It's saying, a more hopeful thing, where is this truth alive in our world? What signs do you see of God bringing in this kingdom now?
I honestly believe we are living at a time when there is a renewed spiritual interest. You might have seen the stories about the Quiet Revival, and then the fact that the Quiet Revival data was dodgy. I don't know if you've picked anything of that up, but what I think was helpful in the way the Bible Society communicated that was, first of all, it was the polling company who didn't do the usual checks that they should have done. But secondly, what they were saying was, okay, so maybe the report about a quiet revival in our nation was overstating it, but there is definitely something happening. And of course, young people especially, think about the generation, my generation younger, are interested in spiritual things in a way that is quite new and fresh. But they're not just looking to Christianity, they're looking at everything. And that is exciting because it presents an opportunity for us. But where I also see the kingdom of God coming is in things like this. So I work in the realm of public policy, where we're trying to persuade the government to change the law on various things. And one of the areas we've invested a huge amount of time over the last decade is the whole question of protecting children from online pornography. We lived at a time, and this was true up until recently, where children as young as 5 were stumbling across explicit adult content online without ever looking for it. They didn't want to find it, but it was so prevalent on the internet. You have to understand the pornography industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. They have a vested interest in pumping their material out. So one of the things we worked on was age verification across all online pornographic content. When we first succeeded in getting that into law, it was in 2016, and then it took 3 years for the government to implement it, and then in October 2019, they abandoned it completely. Then in 2022, a full 3 years later, the then government came back with a new idea. We're going to do it across social media as well. And we said, brilliant, that's exactly what we were telling you in 2016, but you've caught up, fantastic. And last year, July 2025, age verification became a legal reality across all online pornographic content on social media and on pornographic websites, which means children as young as 5 will no longer be stumbling across this harmful content accidentally. And it's a reminder to me that if you're involved in Christian advocacy, as I am, yes, there are things where we might think we wish it was different, but this was an example where we collaborated with lots of charities who don't share our faith, and praise God, we saw the most outstanding success. And I think that's an example of the values of God, the values of Jesus, who said, let the little children come to me, don't hinder them, the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I think that's an example of something really exciting and encouraging happening that has changed our nation for the better. So that's just one example of how I see the kingdom at work. And I mean, I could give you plenty more. I'm an optimist, that always helps.
No, and I think in a way what you've just said is relevant to this next question, and I think it reflects a feeling that a lot of us would have in terms of how we respond here. So the question is, how can we avoid the cynicism which results from our exposure to fake news and the regular revelations of lying by folk in positions of authority?
That's such a good question, because if you witness something happening again and again, it is human nature, isn't it, to start doubting, well, can it ever change? Will we ever get politicians who do the most revolutionary thing that a human being can do, or a politician can do, and stand up and make a promise and then work hard to keep it? And I think there's lots going on here. I think because of the social media generation that we now are, I think that politicians, they stand up, they make their speeches, they sit down and they tweet it. So they're not even listening necessarily to the next exchange in the debate. So I think the digital age has hampered the quality of debate, which has hampered the ability of government to do effective work. So I think that is one problem. But how do you avoid cynicism in the face of that? Well, I think, first of all, Jesus was really clear. Render to Caesar what is Caesar and to God what is God's. There is a legitimacy to human governments. And Paul says, Romans 13, I mean, it's the most amazing bit, one of the most amazing bits in an already amazing letter. He says, when the Emperor Nero was on the throne in Rome, he says, submit yourself to those who are in lawful authority over you. Honor them, pay your taxes. So I actually think one of the things we've got to guard against is a cynicism that thinks that government and authority is automatically a bad thing. I think instead we need to adopt a posture of recognizing that our political leaders are not perfect, just as we're not perfect. And so perhaps we have too high expectations of what they can do. Perhaps we need to lower those expectations, and that would help us not be so cynical. And at the same time, I think things like the Care Leadership Programme, where we're trying to raise up and train new MPs, especially who love Jesus and want to see the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. I mean, I think that's one way that we can try and transform Parliament and politics, is by seeing men and women of great character raised up who care about telling the truth and following through on promises. So there's lots and lots to do. And avoiding cynicism, I think, is both an act of faith on the one hand, And then, look, I mean, no one wants to spend their days feeling just cynical and rubbish about everything, do we? So just choose not to be cynical. Sorry.
Can be quite a pleasure at times, but
yes.
but I think it's a really good example of also where we can join together with people who are at that cutting edge and trying to make a difference and support each other.
Absolutely.
I think this is related in a way, but it brings it right down to the individual. What can an individual do to respond to obviously fake news on the internet that people are believing? I mean, is there any action we can take practically like that?
I think, cultivate a healthy carefulness and suspicion about everything you read online. Don't believe everything. I mean, that's really obvious. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be patronizing at all. I think if someone has believed something that you know to be fake, then I think, being patient and I think using questions as much as possible is the most effective way of trying to help them think it through to see if that brings any further light, rather than sort of charging in with a kind of, you're wrong, and, here's why. Generally, I think we as human beings respond better to someone who's patient with us and kind to us and uses questions to draw out why we think that's real and so on. And, I mean, look, I think when it comes to fake news as well, I actually think platforms like BBC Verify, and there are other fact-checker kind of platforms out there run by media institutions, I try really hard not to be overly cynical about them, because they exist for a reason, and so using them where possible, I have found to be a helpful thing to kind of show to a friend or a family member, well, have you considered this? So really, you're just trying to drop stones in their shoe to try and encourage them to think it through more. And lastly, don't just give up on them if they don't, immediately sort of go, oh my goodness, the light has come, you're right, this was fake. It will take time, because I think we all take time sometimes to change our minds on things, don't we? At least I certainly do. That's because I've got a predisposition to be quite stubborn.
So don't give up.
Don't give up, that's right, yeah.
So this leads very nicely to the next one, which is, can we trust BBC Verify?
No.
I mean, are there sources or BBC Verify or other sources that you would recommend we can go to with some degree of confidence? www.care.org.uk. The CARE website is a fantastic place of truth and nothing but the truth, so help us God. I mean, BBC Verify for me is not something that I come to and think, this is the truth, this must always be true. But I think it's just a helpful platform to help me to question some things that otherwise I might just sort of go along with. So I'm not trying to say BBC Verify is perfect. I'm just saying that I think that sort of interaction with fake news and misinformation can be helpful. I think if my wife was here, if Cara was here, she'd be saying, actually, the idea that the mainstream media is all just kind of part of some sinister plot to basically give us all misinformation is just not true. And actually, journalists often have access to sources of information that help them to verify things, and there's codes of practice for how journalists work. So although not everyone follows it, institutions like The Times, for example, The Guardian, and other newspapers, other media sites, they really do use best journalistic practice in what they're putting out. And so my encouragement to everyone, especially a Christian, is don't just read one news source, but try to read across different news sources, get a breadth of opinion, because that ultimately will probably help you come to a better conclusion about an issue. So certainly if Cara was here, I'm sure that's something what she would say. She would just say it a lot better than that. Well, she's going to be able to check because it's being recorded.
Yes, you're right. I wish I hadn't said that. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think quite a few of the questions are reflecting this. I think you've stimulated a lot of interest and kind of galvanized, and then I think there's a sense of, so what could I do? So there's questions a little bit in that light again. How do we fight against manipulation of truth and the apparent efficacy that seems to be allowing political gain, people to achieve political gain by not telling the truth?
And maybe I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I think in that kind of situation, as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, there's a sense in which I will have my political instincts, And they'll be shaped by a whole bunch of different things, upbringing, nurture, education, and so on. But I don't want to follow any one politician and political leader to the point where I just go along with everything they say, full stop. I want to be willing to disagree even with the political party that I voted for all my life, for example, if I think they're wrong. So I think that's one way that we can be different and be distinct from wider society, perhaps. That willingness, even if someone who I normally would support, if they do something that is wrong, if I have to be willing to say and call it out and say that's just not right, because that is consistent with a Christian witness and a Christian ethic. I mean, the only person whose word I will take all the time as true is Jesus, because he is the truth in himself. Whereas everyone else, there's a sense in which they may end up saying things that I just don't agree with. I mean, it was interesting, my dad, he's gone to glory now, but he grew up in World War II, and he was a huge Winston Churchill fan. And it kind of sometimes got the impression that Winston Churchill could do no wrong in my dad's eyes. I don't think that's actually what my dad thought. But I was listening to the Rest is History podcast on the First World War just recently, and boy, oh boy, did Churchill get some things wrong. I mean, that whole Gallipoli adventure was an absolute fiasco from start to finish, and even after it was a disaster, he was saying that was tremendous, and it could have worked. And you think, just take responsibility and say sorry. I mean, that would apply in all manner of areas of life. Yeah.
Steady, James. I think
sorry.
Probably going to have to leave by the back door here.
Yes.
I just want to get 2 or 3 quick fire ones, which are more practical, and you may please say if these are not your field, but they are concerns for people. How can we spot email and WhatsApp that are scams? Is there any obvious way or filters we can pass them through?
With the email, always check the actual email address that's behind the name. So, the nods there. So we've all done that. Good. Always do that. That's how I catch most of them out. When it comes to WhatsApp, I mean, my phone, I don't know about yours, is pretty good at telling me this is probably spam. And whenever it does that, I block it immediately. If you get a phone call from a number you don't recognize, why would you pick up? Just let it go to voicemail. If it's really urgent and they know you, they'll leave a voicemail. Turns out scammers don't like leaving voicemails. Isn't that weird? So force them to leave a voicemail. Do not pick up to a number you don't recognize. That's my general rule, and I just leave that with you.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so there's one other a little bit like that. I've been told by Google I'm out of cloud storage for my photos, emails, documents, etc.
Yeah, join the club.
I've never asked for them to be stored elsewhere. How do I keep these things to myself? And who could be making use of them? So this fear, I think, there is that somehow your stuff, your private stuff's being sucked up into the cloud, and then you have no control anymore.
I would definitely check the email address of who's sending you that. I've definitely had your cloud is full emails that are completely fake. So I'd start there. I'm afraid that one probably goes then beyond my level of technical expertise. If I'm really honest, I think
that's fine.
Yeah.
Let me see how we're doing for time. Okay, we're coming to a close. I just had a couple of questions, sort of going back to some of the things you've said. I mean, one of the things we see is this increasing polarization and hostility between different social groups, and it's often driven by false narratives. Yeah. Is there something at our individual level or collectively we can do to try and diffuse that? Because it seems that that's one of the powers of this misuse of social media.
So I honestly think, here we are at an event hosted by Churches Together, right? That is part of how we respond to polarization in society, is we model a kind of radical unity that actually people in our communities, when they see it and when they hear about it, they are attracted to it, no question. So I think it starts there. We have to model it ourselves. We can't be out sort of, lecturing about polarization when we are divided. I think it starts with our own house, as it were. I think when it comes to hostility between different groups and false narratives and so on, it comes back to everything we've said about, having that healthy kind of questioning of narratives. I was really helped by something that a theologian once said. He said that Christianity, it will always connect with other narratives, but it will also always challenge them as well. So find those areas of connection with the narratives that you're hearing. And there'll be something within the Christian story that will connect with it. And that might give you an in. But then look for the ways in which the Christian story of, creation, fall, redemption, consummation, look for the ways that grand story will also challenge the narratives that are out there as another way of kind of approaching it.
Yeah, and I think in saying that, I mean, one of the things that you touched upon is that all people are made in the image of God. So within everybody, there is a sense, you
100%.
talked about that, that dislike of being lied to, or that sense of love and community and things. So I guess we don't have, how would you put it, a domination on the truth. There will be elements of underlying truth that are recognised, whatever your faith or no faith.
I think it was, and we were chatting about this in the interval with Natalie as well. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said that a Christian should celebrate the truth wherever you find it. I've always found that really helpful, and there is a thing of, Jesus says the sun shines on the righteous and the unrighteous, the rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. There's a thing called God's grace to all human beings. And because all are made in his image, there's always going to be a connection point with our neighbours. And I think when it comes to, the politics of today and the polarisation and so on, I think, we don't want to be the ones who are sort of putting people in groups that we just won't touch them, we just won't go near them. We of all people should be the ones who are willing to be like the Good Samaritan and cross the road to help someone who's in distress, regardless of their politics. So I think, that comes back to the modelling ourselves. We want to show the love of God by loving each other well, but then also loving our neighbour, whether we agree with them or not.
Okay. Just one last one, and then we'll wrap up with a few thank yous. You've worked at this interface of policy and faith, and that's very much the role of care. I think that's come across really clearly. I just wonder where you would draw the line between regulating harmful information and protecting free speech.
Oh, an easy one to finish with.
I know.
Yeah, thanks.
So it's my